I never thought a Tuesday morning snowmobile ride would turn into a war with the most vindictive homeowners association in Colorado. But there I was, standing in 6 inches of fresh powder while Brenda Morrison waved a clipboard at me like it was some kind of holy document. "You cannot ride that machine on these trails," she announced, her voice sharp enough to crack ice. The wind whipped her blonde bob around her face, but she didn't even flinch. She just stood there in her pristine white parka, looking like she'd never actually touched snow in her life. I killed the engine on my Polaris and pulled off my helmet. "Brenda, I've been riding these trails for 3 years. What are you talking about?" The Pine Ridge HOA held an emergency meeting last night. "We've voted to ban all motorized vehicles from the community trail system, effective immediately." She thrust the clipboard toward me, and I could see it was covered in official-looking letterhead and dense paragraphs of text. "You held a meeting without notifying everyone," I said. My name is Marcus Malone, and I'd lived in Pine Ridge for 5 years. I'd never missed an HOA meeting notification before. "We sent emails," Brenda said, her tone suggesting that was more than enough. "This community is committed to maintaining a peaceful, quiet environment. Your snowmobile violates at least 4 different noise ordinances." "What noise ordinances?" "And these trails have always allowed snowmobiles. Half the neighborhood rides them. Not anymore." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you want to check if your wallet was still in your pocket. "Anyone caught operating a motorized vehicle on HOA trails will be fined $500 per incident." I looked past her at the trail system that wound through the ponderosa pines and aspens behind our development. Pine Ridge sat just outside of Breckenridge, Colorado, and the trails were one of the main reasons I'd bought my house here. In winter, they connected to hundreds of miles of backcountry routes. In summer, they were perfect for mountain biking and hiking. The community had 23 homes, and most of us used those trails year-round. "This is insane," I said. "You can't just change the rules overnight." "Actually, according to Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws, the board can implement emergency restrictions when necessary to preserve property values and resident welfare." She tapped the clipboard. "It's all legal, Mr. Malone. Now, I'll need you to remove your vehicle from HOA property immediately, or I'll be forced to call the Summit County Sheriff." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to figure out if she was serious. The look on her face told me she absolutely was. Behind her, I could see her husband Frank standing next to their garage, arms crossed, watching us like he was providing backup for a drug bust instead of a conversation about a snowmobile. "Fine," I said finally, "but this isn't over." "I certainly hope it is," Brenda called after me as I fired up the Polaris and headed back toward my house. "We have noise monitors now. I'll know if you try to sneak out here again." That night, I did something I should have done years ago. I actually read the HOA bylaws, all 47 pages of them. It took me until midnight and 3 cups of coffee, but I finally understood what had happened. Brenda Morrison had been elected HOA president 8 months ago, and she'd spent that time slowly consolidating power. The current board consisted of 5 members, and she'd managed to get her friends Carol Patterson and Linda Freeman elected to fill 2 vacant spots. That gave her a 3-vote majority that could basically do whatever she wanted. The bylaw she'd cited was real, but it was meant for actual emergencies, like a water main break or a wildfire threat. Using it to ban snowmobiles was a stretch at best and a complete abuse of power at worst. I called my neighbor Derek Hansen the next morning. Derek was a lawyer who worked in Denver, and he'd been riding the trails longer than anyone else in Pine Ridge. "Yeah, I got the email about the meeting," Derek said when I explained what happened. It came at 11 at night. By the time I saw it the next morning, the vote had already happened. That can't be legal. It's not. Colorado HOA law requires at least 10 days' notice for any board meeting and 48 hours for emergency meetings. Even if they claimed it was an emergency, which it clearly wasn't, they didn't give proper notice. I could hear him typing in the background. But here's the thing, Marcus. Fighting this through legal channels is going to take months and cost thousands in attorney fees. The HOA has insurance that covers legal costs. You don't. So she just wins, unless you want to run for the board next year and try to vote out the restriction. Derek paused. Or unless you can find another way. That's when the idea started forming. I spent the rest of the day in my office, which had a view of the trail system. The trails themselves ran through about 40 acres of forest behind the development. I'd always assumed the HOA owned that land, but I'd never actually checked. It took me an hour of digging through Summit County property records online, but I finally found what I was looking for. The trail system wasn't owned by the HOA at all. It was owned by a company called Mountain Vista Properties, LLC. And according to the county records, that company had given the Pine Ridge HOA an easement to use the trails back in 1997, when the development was first built. The easement allowed HOA members to access the trails for recreational purposes, but easements aren't ownership. The land itself still belonged to Mountain Vista Properties. I spent the next 3 days tracking down who actually owned Mountain Vista Properties. The LLC was registered to an address in Denver, but that turned out to be a law office that handled incorporation paperwork. The lawyer I talked to there was polite but unhelpful until I explained I was interested in potentially purchasing property from Mountain Vista. "Oh, you want to talk to Gerald Finch," the lawyer said. "Hold on, let me get you his number." Gerald Finch turned out to be a 78-year-old retired developer who lived in Boulder. When I called him and explained I was interested in the 40-acre parcel behind Pine Ridge, he actually laughed. "I forgot I still owned that," he said. "My company built Pine Ridge back in the 90s, and we kept that parcel thinking we might expand the development someday. Never happened. I've been paying property taxes on it for 30 years and getting nothing out of it except occasional headaches from your HOA president. Brenda Morrison. That's the one. She called me 6 months ago demanding we do something about erosion on the trails. I told her that's what the easement is for the HOA maintains the trails, we own the land. She didn't like that answer," he chuckled. "Why are you interested in it? It's pretty much just forest. How much do you want for it?" There was a pause. "You're serious?" "Completely." "Well, let me think." "It's 40 acres, but it's landlocked except through the Pine Ridge development. Can't build on it because it's zoned recreational. The property taxes are about $8,000 a year." Another pause. "I'd take $200,000 for it." That's $5,000 an acre, which is well below market for Summit County, but like I said, there's not much you can do with it. My heart was racing. $200,000 was a lot of money, but I'd sold a software company 2 years ago and still had most of the proceeds sitting in investments. I could afford it. What if I offered you $150,000 cash and we close in 2 weeks? Gerald was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "Son, I'm 78 years old and I have grandkids who want to go to college. You get me $175,000 in cash and you've got a deal, but I want to close in 1 week, not 2. "Deal," I said before I could talk myself out of it. The next 7 days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and wire transfers. I hired a real estate attorney out of Denver who specialized in land deals, and she moved everything forward at lightning speed. The title search came back clean. There were no liens or encumbrances except for the easement with Pine Ridge HOA, which would transfer with the property. I didn't tell anyone in Pine Ridge what I was doing. As far as they knew, I was just the guy who'd gotten his snowmobile banned and was now complying with the new rules. I saw Brenda twice during that week, once at the mailboxes and once when she was walking her ridiculous miniature poodle past my house. Both times she gave me a smug little smile that made it very clear she thought she'd won. The closing happened on a Friday afternoon in a title company office in Breckenridge. Gerald Finch showed up in person, which surprised me. He was a tall, thin man with white hair and sharp blue eyes that suggested he didn't miss much. "I did some research on you after we talked," he said while we waited for the title company to prepare the final documents. "Made a nice exit from that cybersecurity startup you founded. Smart work." "Thanks," I said. "I got lucky with timing. Luck favors the prepared." He studied me for a moment. "You going to tell me why you're really buying this land? Because I don't think it's just because you love nature." I told him the story. All of it. The snowmobile ban, Brenda's abuse of HOA power, the improper meeting notice. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was grinning. "Son, I've been waiting 30 years for someone to put that woman in her place. Well, not her specifically, but every HOA tyrant like her." He leaned forward. "You know what the best part is? That easement she's relying on. It has a termination clause. Either party can cancel it with 90 days written notice. It's in Section 4 of the easement agreement." My attorney looked up sharply. "Are you sure?" "I wrote the damn thing," Gerald said. "Check the property records, it's all there." We spent the next 20 minutes reviewing the easement document, which was indeed part of the public record. Gerald was right. Section 4 clearly stated that either Mountain Vista Properties or the Pine Ridge HOA could terminate the easement with 90 days written notice, provided such termination didn't violate any existing county ordinances or regulations. "Why did you include that?" I asked. "Because I didn't want to give the HOA permanent rights to my land if they weren't going to maintain it properly. Figured if they let it go to hell, I could cancel the easement and find another buyer." He shrugged. "Like I said, never happened. They maintained it fine until now. But if I terminate the easement, they lose access to the trails completely." "Yep. The only other access to that 40 acres is through National Forest land on the west side, but you'd need a permit from the Forest Service to create a trailhead there, and that takes years." Gerald's grin widened. "Of course, as the new owner, you could grant a new easement to whoever you wanted, with whatever terms you wanted." I signed the papers in a daze. When we walked out of the title company, I owned 40 acres of forest, a trail system, and leverage over the most controlling HOA president in Colorado. I waited until Monday morning to make my move. I'd spent the weekend consulting with my attorney and drafting 2 documents. The first was a formal termination notice for the existing easement. The second was a new easement agreement with very specific terms. At 9 in the morning, I sent certified letters to Brenda Morrison as HOA president and to all 22 other homeowners in Pine Ridge. The letter explained that I had purchased the land containing the trail system, that I was terminating the existing easement per Section 4 of the original agreement, and that access to the trails would be suspended in 90 days unless the HOA agreed to new terms. The new terms were simple. First, the HOA would immediately rescind the ban on snowmobiles and all other motorized vehicles on the trails, except for ATVs, which were already restricted by county ordinance. Second, the HOA would agree to maintain the trails per a detailed maintenance schedule I'd outlined. Third, Any future changes to trail usage rules would require a full HOA vote with proper notice and at least a 2/3 majority to pass. Fourth, the easement could not be terminated by either party without cause. My phone started ringing at 9:15. I ignored it. By 10, there were 3 voicemails from Brenda, each one more frantic than the last. By 11, my doorbell was ringing. I opened it to find Brenda standing there with Carol Patterson and Linda Freeman flanking her like backup dancers. All 3 women looked furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Brenda demanded. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "We should talk." They filed into my living room and I gestured to the couch. None of them sat. "You can't do this," Brenda said. She was clutching a copy of my letter and I could see her hands shaking. "Those trails belong to the community." "No, they don't. They belong to me. I bought them fair and square. You can verify the deed transfer with Summit County if you want. The easement can be terminated by either party. It says so right in Section 4. I'm terminating it." I kept my voice calm and reasonable. "But I'm offering a new easement with very fair terms. All you have to do is stop abusing your power as HOA president." "I haven't abused anything," Brenda snapped. "Everything I've done has been for the good of the community. You held an improper meeting to ban snowmobiles because you personally don't like them. That's not serving the community. That's serving yourself." Carol stepped forward. She was a short woman with gray hair and glasses that made her look like a librarian. "The noise from those snowmobiles is disruptive. Many residents have complained." "Name one," I said. "Besides you 3 and your husbands." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Look," I said. "I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I'm trying to fix a problem. You 3 have been running the HOA like your personal fiefdom, and it needs to stop. The trails have allowed snowmobiles for 30 years. You don't get to change that on a whim." "We have the authority," Brenda started. "You have the authority the bylaws give you, nothing more. And you violated those bylaws when you held a meeting with improper notice." I pulled out a copy of Colorado HOA law that I'd printed out. State law is very clear about meeting notice requirements. What you did was illegal. If I wanted to, I could sue the HOA and probably win. Linda Freeman, who hadn't spoken yet, crossed her arms. "So this is blackmail. Do what you want or you'll take away the trails." "No, this is me offering a compromise. Accept reasonable terms for a new easement or lose access entirely." "Your choice." "We'll fight this," Brenda said. Her face was red now and she looked like she wanted to throw something. "We'll take you to court. We'll make your life hell." "With what money?" I asked. "The HOA has about $20,000 in reserves." "My attorney says a case like this could cost 10 times that much. Are you ready to special assess every homeowner in Pine Ridge to fund your vendetta?" That stopped her. I could see her mind working, trying to find another angle. "You have 90 days to decide," I said. "My offer stands until then. After that, the easement terminates and the trails become private property. Nobody gets access except me." They left without another word, and I watched through my window as they huddled in Brenda's driveway, clearly strategizing their next move. The next 2 days were chaos. My phone rang constantly. Some homeowners were angry, some were confused, and some thought the whole thing was hilarious. Derek Hansen stopped by Tuesday evening with a bottle of bourbon and a huge grin. "I can't believe you actually bought the trails," he said, pouring us both generous glasses. "That's the most beautiful power play I've ever seen." "I just want to ride my snowmobile," I said, though we both knew it was more than that now. "Sure you do." Derek raised his glass. "To property rights and karma." We clinked glasses. On Wednesday, I got an email from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Richard Wells who worked for a firm in Denver. The email was polite but firm, explaining that the HOA believed my termination of the easement was improper, and that they intended to seek legal remedies if I didn't withdraw the notice. I forwarded the email to my attorney, who sent back a detailed response citing case law and Colorado property statutes. The basic message was, "Bring it on." Thursday evening, I got a knock on my door from Tom Rodriguez, one of my neighbors who wasn't on the HOA board. Tom was a contractor in his 50s who'd lived in Pine Ridge since the beginning. "Got a minute?" he asked. I invited him in and offered him coffee. We sat at my kitchen table and Tom looked uncomfortable. "Look, I think what Brenda did was wrong," he said. "The snowmobile ban was stupid and she should have given proper notice for the meeting. A lot of us agree with you about that. Okay. But cutting off trail access for everyone isn't the answer. My kids use those trails. So do a lot of other families. You'd be punishing people who had nothing to do with Brenda's power trip." He had a point, and I'd been wrestling with it since I sent the termination notice. "Tom, I don't want to cut off access. That's why I offered the new easement. All the HOA has to do is agree to reasonable terms." "Brenda won't do it. You know she won't. It would be admitting she was wrong." Tom ran a hand through his hair. "She's already talking about trying to get you kicked out of the neighborhood for being a nuisance. She can't kick me out. I own my house. She can make your life miserable, though. Trust me, I've seen her do it to other people." "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Call for a special meeting of all homeowners. Present your case directly. Let everyone vote on whether to accept your terms." Tom leaned forward. "Most people in Pine Ridge are reasonable. If you explain what happened and why you're doing this, I think they'll side with you. Brenda only has power because most people don't pay attention to HOA stuff. Make them pay attention." It was good advice. I spent Friday preparing a presentation and working with Tom to organize a special homeowner meeting. According to the bylaws, we needed at least 1/3 of homeowners to request a meeting, which meant 8 out of 23. Tom worked his contacts, and by Friday evening, we had 11 signatures. The meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock in the Pine Ridge Clubhouse, a small building near the entrance of the development that was usually used for HOA meetings and the occasional birthday party. Brenda tried to block it, of course. She sent an email Saturday morning claiming the meeting request was invalid because it didn't follow proper procedures. My attorney sent a response explaining exactly which bylaw authorized special meetings and how we'd followed it to the letter. Sunday afternoon, I arrived at the clubhouse at 2:45. The parking lot was already full, and I could see people standing outside talking in small groups. This was the most attendance an HOA meeting had gotten in years. Tom met me at the door. "Pretty much everyone's here. This should be interesting." Inside, the clubhouse was packed. All 23 homeowner households were represented, many with spouses or adult children. Brenda sat at the front table with Carol and Linda, looking like she was preparing for battle. Someone had set up a projector and screen, and I'd brought my laptop with the presentation I'd prepared. At 3 o'clock exactly, Tom called the meeting to order. He explained the purpose of the gathering and then turned it over to me. I stood up and walked to the front. For a moment, I just looked at everyone. Some faces were friendly, some were hostile, most were just curious. "Thanks for coming," I said. "I know there's been a lot of confusion and anger about the trail situation, so I want to explain exactly what happened and why I did what I did." I walked them through everything: the snowmobile ban, the improper meeting notice, my research into who owned the trails, the purchase of the property, the easement termination. I kept my tone factual and didn't editorialize, just laid out the timeline and the legal realities. Then I showed them the terms of the new easement I was proposing. I put together a side-by-side comparison showing what rights the HOA had under the old easement versus what they'd have under the new one. The new terms were actually more generous in some ways, spelling out exactly what maintenance was required and protecting the trails from future arbitrary rule changes. The bottom line is this, I said. I don't want to be the bad guy here. I don't want to take away something the community values. But I also can't let the HOA board abuse its power without consequences. All I'm asking is that we go back to the way things were, with snowmobiles allowed on the trails, and that we put some protections in place to prevent this from happening again. When I finished, Brenda immediately stood up. Mr. Malone's presentation conveniently leaves out the fact that his snowmobile is a nuisance that disturbs the peace of our community. The board had every right to ban motorized vehicles, and his attempt to bully us into reversing that decision is unconscionable. The meeting notice was improper, someone called out. It was Derek Hansen. You violated state law, Brenda. That's your opinion, Brenda shot back. It's not an opinion. It's in the statute. Derek pulled out his phone. Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 3833.3308. I can read it to you if you want. The board acted in good faith, Carol said, standing up next to Brenda. We had complaints about noise. From who? Tom asked. Name names, Carol. Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You know what I think? This came from a woman named Sarah Kim who lived 3 houses down from me. I think Brenda doesn't like snowmobiles, so she banned them. I don't think this has anything to do with the community. That's not true, Brenda said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Then why didn't you ask the rest of us what we thought? Sarah continued. Why have a meeting in the middle of the night with no real notice? If the community really wanted snowmobiles banned, you could have put it to a vote. Other people started chiming in. Some supported Brenda, mostly her immediate friends and neighbors, but more people were questioning the process and the reasoning behind the ban. The meeting devolved into argument for a few minutes until Tom banged a gavel on the table. Okay, everyone calm down, he said. Let's put this to a vote. All in favor of accepting Marcus's proposed easement terms, which include allowing snowmobiles and other current uses of the trails, raise your hand. I counted along with Tom. 18 hands went up out of 23 households. All opposed, 5 hands. Brenda, Carol, Linda, and 2 others. Motion passes, Tom said. The HOA accepts the new easement terms. Brenda stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. This is outrageous. The board has the authority to make these decisions. You can't just overrule us. We just did, Tom said calmly. The membership has spoken. Now, I'd like to make another motion. I move that we hold a vote of no confidence in the current board and elect new leadership. Second, Derek said immediately. What followed was the most dramatic hour I'd ever witnessed at an HOA meeting. Brenda tried every procedural trick she could think of to delay or prevent the vote, but Derek knew the bylaws as well as she did and shot down each attempt. When the vote finally happened, it wasn't even close. Brenda, Carol, and Linda were all removed from the board by a margin of 19-4. Tom was elected as the new president. Derek became vice president. Sarah Kim became treasurer. 2 other homeowners I didn't know well, James Fletcher and Patricia Moore, filled the remaining board seats. Brenda stormed out before the meeting was over, her face purple with rage. Carol and Linda followed her like ducklings following their mother. Afterward, Tom shook my hand. Well, that was something. Thank you, I said. I couldn't have done this without you. You shouldn't have had to do it at all, Tom replied, but I'm glad you did. Brenda's been running this place like a dictatorship for too long. I went home that evening feeling like a weight had been lifted. The new board signed the easement agreement the next day, and I filed it with Summit County. The trails were safe, snowmobiles were allowed again, and Pine Ridge had leadership that actually cared about serving the community instead of controlling it. But Brenda Morrison wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I woke up to find my mailbox had been destroyed. Not just knocked over, but completely smashed, like someone had taken a baseball bat to it. My mail was scattered across the snow. I called the Summit County Sheriff's Office and filed a report. The deputy who came out took photos and wrote up the incident, but he was honest about the chances of catching whoever did it. "Unless you have cameras that caught someone in the act, there's not much we can do," he said. "Mailbox vandalism happens, usually kids." "I don't think it was kids," I said. "You think you know who did it? I have suspicions, but no proof." The deputy nodded like he'd heard this before. "If it happens again, definitely call us. If there's a pattern, that's different." I installed security cameras that afternoon. Front door, driveway, and one covering the mailbox area. They were the good kind with night vision and motion detection that sent alerts to my phone. 3 nights later, at 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the driveway camera. I pulled up the app and watched in real time as someone in dark clothing crept toward my truck, which was parked in the driveway. They had something in their hand. I was out of bed and dialing 911 before they reached the truck. I watched on my phone as the person keyed a long scratch down the driver's side, then started on the passenger side. "Summit County 911, what's your emergency?" "Someone's vandalizing my truck right now," I said, giving my address. "I have them on camera." "Are you in a safe location?" "I'm inside my house." "They're outside. Deputies are on the way. Stay inside and stay on the line." I watched the camera feed as the vandal finished with my truck and started walking toward my front porch. When they passed under the porch light, their face was briefly visible. It was Frank Morrison, Brenda's husband. He spray-painted something on my front door, then hurried away down the street. The whole thing took less than 3 minutes. Sheriff's deputies arrived 4 minutes later, but Frank was already gone. The message on my door in red spray paint said, "Leave." The deputies reviewed my camera footage and confirmed what I'd seen. One of them knew Frank from around town. "That's definitely Frank Morrison," the deputy said. "We'll go pick him up." They found him at home, still wearing the same dark jacket from the video. Brenda answered the door and tried to claim Frank had been home all night, but the deputies weren't buying it. They arrested Frank for criminal mischief and took him to the Summit County Jail. I spent the rest of the night giving a statement and filing formal charges. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted and angry. The scratch on my truck ran the entire length of both sides and would cost thousands to fix properly. Frank made bail the next morning, but the damage was done. Everyone in Pine Ridge heard about the arrest within hours. The new HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to send the Morrisons a violation notice for disturbing the peace and engaging in criminal conduct that negatively impacted the community. Brenda sent a scathing email in response, claiming I'd set up her husband and that the whole thing was a conspiracy to drive them out of the neighborhood. Nobody believed her. The criminal case moved forward quickly. Frank had a public defender who tried to negotiate a plea deal, but I wasn't interested in being generous. The damage to my truck and the stress of the whole situation had cost me too much already. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks out, but 3 weeks before the court date, something else happened that changed everything. I was riding my snowmobile on the trails on a Wednesday afternoon, enjoying the fresh powder from the night before, when I came around a bend and nearly collided with Brenda. She was standing in the middle of the trail, and for a second I thought she was hurt or needed help. I killed the engine. "Brenda, what are you doing out here?" She just stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a handgun. My blood went cold. "Brenda, what the hell? You ruined everything," she said. Her voice was shaking and so was the gun. "My husband is going to jail because of you. The HOA hates us. Our friends won't talk to us. This is all your fault." I raised my hand slowly. "Brenda, put the gun down. This isn't going to solve anything. You think you're so smart. Buying the trails, getting Frank arrested, turning everyone against us." Tears were running down her face now. "We've lived here for 12 years. This was our home, and you destroyed it." "You did this to yourself," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though my heart was hammering. "All I wanted was to ride my snowmobile. You're the one who made this into a war." "I was protecting the community," she shouted. "Someone had to maintain standards. Someone had to care about property values and quality of life. By banning things you personally didn't like. That's not protecting anyone, Brenda. That's being a tyrant." The gun wobbled in her hand. "I should have stopped you when I had the chance. I should have found a way to force you out. Brenda, listen to me. Whatever you're thinking about doing right now, don't. You point that gun at me, you pull that trigger, your life is over. Is that really what you want?" For a long moment, we just stood there. The forest was silent except for the wind in the pines and the sound of my own breathing. I was acutely aware that I was in the middle of nowhere with no way to call for help and a potentially unstable woman holding a weapon. Then Brenda's face crumpled. The gun lowered and she started sobbing. "I don't know what to do. Everything is falling apart." I stayed very still. "Give me the gun, Brenda. I can't go on like this. Everyone hates me. Give me the gun and we'll talk, but I need you to hand it over right now." Slowly, moving like she was underwater, Brenda held out the weapon. I took it carefully, checked that the safety was on, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. My hands were shaking. "Okay," I said. "Now let's get you somewhere safe." I called 911 from my cell phone, which thankfully had service up here. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, and they dispatched both deputies and an ambulance. I convinced Brenda to sit down on a fallen log while we waited, and I kept talking to her, trying to keep her calm and grounded. It took 20 minutes for help to arrive. 2 deputies hiked up the trail from the nearest access point, followed by paramedics. Brenda didn't resist when they led her away. She just looked defeated and small. One of the deputies stayed behind to take my statement and collect the gun. It turned out to be unloaded, which was somehow both a relief and deeply disturbing. Had Brenda come out here planning to threaten me, knowing she couldn't actually shoot? Or had she forgotten to load it? I'd never know. The deputy told me Brenda would likely be placed on a psychiatric hold and evaluated. Depending on what the DA decided, she might face charges for felony menacing. I rode my snowmobile back home in a daze. The adrenaline was wearing off, and I felt shaky and nauseous. This had gone so far beyond an HOA dispute. Someone had pulled a gun on me, over snowmobiles and trail access. Derek came over that evening after he heard what happened. Word had spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire. "Jesus, Marcus," he said, pouring us both whiskey without asking. "You could have been killed. The gun wasn't loaded. You didn't know that at the time." He was right. I took a long drink and felt the whiskey burn down my throat. "What happens now?" Derek asked. "I don't know. I gave a statement to the sheriff. They're investigating. Brenda's in the hospital getting evaluated. Frank must be losing his mind. Probably." I didn't have much sympathy for Frank at this point. You know what the crazy thing is? All of this could have been avoided if she'd just let people ride their snowmobiles. Derek shook his head. It was never really about the snowmobiles. It was about control. Some people can't handle not being in charge. Over the next few weeks, the legal situation got complicated. Brenda was charged with felony menacing, which in Colorado is a serious crime that carries potential prison time. Her attorney tried to argue diminished capacity and mental health issues, and there was some validity to that. Brenda had apparently been struggling with anxiety and depression for years, and the stress of losing control of the HOA had triggered something. Frank pleaded guilty to criminal mischief in his case and got a suspended sentence plus community service and restitution. He had to pay for the repairs to my truck, which came to almost $4,000 with the paintwork. The Morrisons put their house up for sale in March. They couldn't afford 2 legal defenses and a mortgage, and besides, everyone in Pine Ridge knew what had happened. There was no coming back from pulling a gun on a neighbor, even an unloaded one. Brenda eventually took a plea deal that involved probation, mandatory psychiatric treatment, and a lot of community service. She avoided prison, which I was actually relieved about. I'd never wanted to destroy anyone. I just wanted to ride my snowmobile. Tom Rodriguez turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He ran meetings efficiently, communicated clearly with homeowners, and actually seemed to care about making Pine Ridge a better place to live. The new board revised the bylaws to add more protections against the kind of abuse Brenda had engaged in, including stricter meeting notice requirements and limits on what the board could do without a full homeowner vote. Spring came to the Colorado high country, and the snow melted, and the trails transformed into perfect mountain biking terrain. I sold my snowmobile and bought a bike, figuring I'd had enough winter excitement for a while. One afternoon in May, I was riding the trails when I came across Tom working on a bridge repair. He'd brought proper lumber and tools, and he was replacing rotted boards that had been ignored for years. "Need a hand?" I asked, stopping my bike. "Sure," Tom said, handing me a hammer. "Always appreciate help." We worked in companionable silence for a while, replacing boards and securing them with galvanized screws that would hold up to the weather. "You ever regret buying this land?" Tom asked eventually. "All the drama it caused." I thought about it. The fear when Brenda pointed that gun at me, the stress of the legal battles, the vandalism and the anger, but I also thought about what Pine Ridge looked like now. A functional HOA that served its members instead of controlling them, trails that everyone could use and enjoy. A community that had learned to stand up against petty tyranny. "No," I said, "I don't regret it." Tom nodded like that was the answer he expected. "Good, because the HOA wants to make you an honorary board member. You'd be an advisor, no official duties, but you'd have a say in decisions about the trails since you own the land." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I think you guys are doing great without me. Just keep the trails open and maintained and I'm happy." "Fair enough." Tom secured the last board and stood up, testing the bridge with his weight. It held solid. "You know what the real lesson is from all this?" "What's that?" "Community isn't about rules and restrictions. It's about people treating each other with respect and working together." He looked out at the forest, at the trail winding through the aspens and pines. Brenda forgot that. She thought being HOA president meant she got to control everyone, but leadership is about service, not power. "That's pretty philosophical for a contractor," I said. Tom laughed. "I'm deep, man. I contain multitudes." We packed up the tools and hiked back down the trail together. The evening sun was filtering through the trees, turning everything golden. Somewhere nearby, I could hear the sound of kids laughing as they rode their bikes on a different section of trail. This was what Pine Ridge was supposed to be. Not a fiefdom ruled by an HOA board, but a community where people could live and play and enjoy the incredible natural beauty of the Colorado mountains. When I got home, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from Gerald Finch, the man who'd sold me the land. "Marcus," it read, "I heard through the grapevine about everything that happened with your HOA. Sounds like you've had quite an adventure. I wanted to let you know I think you did the right thing. Too many communities get taken over by petty tyrants who forget that rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. You stood up for what was right, even when it cost you. That takes courage. Enjoy those trails and thank you for taking care of the land. It's in good hands. Best wishes, Gerald." I put the letter on my refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like Colorado. 2 months later, in July, Derek organized a community barbecue at the clubhouse. Pretty much everyone showed up, including some people I'd never really talked to before. We grilled burgers and hot dogs. Kids ran around playing, and people told stories about their favorite trail experiences. Frank Morrison had moved away after the house sold. Brenda was living with her sister in Colorado Springs, working on her mental health and serving her probation. Nobody missed them, but nobody celebrated their departure either. It was just a sad ending to a situation that never should have happened. Sarah Kim came up to me while I was manning the grill. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" "For caring enough to fight. Most people would have just given up and moved away when Brenda banned the snowmobiles. You actually did something about it." "I'm not sure I had much choice," I said. "She wasn't going to stop. Still, you made Pine Ridge better." Sarah smiled. "My kids love riding their bikes on those trails." They were devastated when they thought they might lose access. That night, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the last of the mess, Tom found me. "Hell of a journey," he said, helping me bag up the trash. "Yeah," I agreed. Not how I expected my first few years in Pine Ridge to go. "Would you do it again, knowing everything that happened?" I thought about my answer carefully. The fear, the anger, the stress, all of that had been real. But so was this. A community that was stronger and more united than it had been before, trails that would be protected and accessible for years to come. The satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up against something wrong and won. "Yeah," I said, "I would." Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "Good man." The stars were coming out as I walked home, bright and clear in the thin mountain air. My house was dark and quiet, and I could see the trail system stretching out into the forest behind the development. Tomorrow, I'd probably go for another bike ride. Maybe explore some of the sections I hadn't checked out yet. I'd come to Colorado for the mountains and the freedom and the chance to build a life in a place I loved. I'd gotten all of that, plus a crash course in HOA politics, property law, and the importance of standing up for your rights. The trails were safe. The community was healthy, and I could ride my snowmobile whenever I wanted, at least once winter came back around. Somewhere in the forest, an owl hooted. I stood on my deck for a moment, just breathing in the pine-scented air and feeling grateful for all of it. The good parts and the hard parts both. Then I went inside, locked the door, and fell asleep thinking about mountain trails and summer evening barbecues, and the strange, winding path that had led me to buy 40 acres of Colorado forest just to prove a point. It had been worth every penny.